We are experiencing the greatest technological and economic shift in human history. We need a way to help millions of Americans transition through this period, and a universal basic income is the best and most efficient way to do that. Hello, I'm Andrew Yang, and I'm running for president as a Democrat in 2020. I believe I have the right vision, priorities, and values to improve the lives of millions of Americans.
Tell us a little bit about the Freedom Dividend.
So the Freedom Dividend is my flagship policy where every American adult receives $1,000 a month, free and clear, starting at age 18. And what this would enable Americans to do is just pay our bills, for one thing, because so many of us are having trouble with that. But then it also allows Americans to make transitions and move and start new businesses and start adapting for what's going to be a really historic time of change.
The very same day that I sat down with Andrew Yang, an estimated 1.4 million students around the world skipped school to protest inaction on climate change. No matter how you might feel about it, the climate conversation is shaping up to be a major issue for the Democrats this election cycle, and emerging technology is going to be a critical part of that conversation. What is your plan to address climate change?
Well, one thing I'm optimistic about is that right now, millions of Americans can't focus on climate change because they can't pay their bills. And if you have a mindset of scarcity and just like hand to mouth, then I come to you and say, hey, the Earth, they'll say, I can't pay my bills. You know, the penguins can wait. By issuing the Freedom Dividend, we can get everyone's heads up and be able to focus more on bigger problems like climate change, which is existential threat 1A to our way of life. So I'm for carbon fee and dividend, rejoining the Paris Accords, investing hundreds of billions in a more resilient infrastructure for the spirit of the Green New Deal. The toughest part is that we're only 15% of global emissions, and so even if we go after it big, we're probably just going to lower the rate a little bit. So I would also invest in carbon capture and sequestration and geoengineering measures because, in my mind, unfortunately, like at this point, we either have to expect the worst or start trying to counteract the worst effects.
You mentioned geoengineering. I know that certain ways of geoengineering can be kind of dicey in terms of the results that they produce. What sorts of geoengineering would you be in favor of?
Well, I really like methods of geoengineering that you can undo without a problem. And the dark part is that we're geoengineering right now. We're geoengineering in the worst way possible, which is just like accidentally and haphazardly. So people are like, oh, you can't mess with it. It's like, are you kidding? Like we're messing with it like in a way that's going to be catastrophic now. So I'll give you an example, and it's going to sound sort of science fiction-y, but you all will like it. Is you send up a satellite on an elevator. So it's like, you know, you can bring it back down. You set up a satellite and then just have it like have expandable mirrors that end up, you can block the sun. And believe it or not, that actually might help reduce like the warming of the Earth. And then if you don't like it, you can like either retract the mirrors or just bring the satellite down.
I think you also had something on your website about like shoring up like glaciers?
Yeah, so glaciers melt because warm water hits their base. And so if you shore up Earth at the base of the glacier and then the warm water hits the Earth and you can slow the melt rate, possibly. I'm not saying it's great, there is no silver bullet, but we certainly have to start making moves instead of just sort of waiting for the worst to occur.
I know we haven't seen much from it, but what role do you think fusion power is going to play?
I'm all for it. I mean, if you can invest in a form of energy that solves your energy problem and brings down carbon emissions like that, I mean, you have to. I would also invest in an asteroid detection telescope because that's only like a couple $100 million, and it right now we don't know. It's like something could be on the way, like Armageddon style, and we just wouldn't know. So it's like, well, it's like entire civilization versus 200 million. It's like, well, you know, we should probably spend that money. So there are a few things that we should do that are like in that direction.
What are your thoughts on the Green New Deal?
You know, the Green New Deal is a tremendous vision, and I just love the ambition of it. And it's the right idea. I mean, we should be moving towards renewables. So, I'm all for the spirit of it, and we should try and get done as much of it as we can.
The Green New Deal has a federal jobs guarantee as one of its stated goals. Do you think that that is an adequate response to the threat of automation if everybody has a job waiting for them in the green sector?
You know, I absolutely love the spirit of a federal jobs guarantee, particularly if it's being used to like install solar panels or whatnot. But I'm concerned that a federal jobs guarantee in real life would be somewhere between problematic and dystopian. Because if you imagine a world where it's like, hey, a million people here, you have nothing to do, you know what we're going to do? We're going to have you do this. And then if it's like, what if I'm bad at that job? What if I don't like that job? What if I don't like my boss? What if I want to do something else? Like, well, you know, it's this or nothing, and if you don't do this, you die.
My initial knee-jerk reaction was, get the out of here. Like, universal basic income, just going to give people money, they're just going to be lazy, nothing's ever going to get done. That's a terrible idea. And then I started paying attention to the rise of AI and automation and how many jobs are going to get taken away from. And then once you see the actual numbers, it's pretty staggering.
Yeah, so I've been driven to universal basic income in part because I've been looking at the numbers. The 5 most common jobs in the United States right now are administrative and clerical work, retail and sales, food service and food prep, truck driving and transportation and manufacturing. Those 5 jobs comprise about half of all American jobs. Only 32% of Americans graduate from college. So the average American is a high school grad doing one of these 5 jobs. And if you look at it, technology is already doing a number on each of these jobs. Like the first, administrative and clerical, includes call center workers, and AI is in the process of taking over that job. Retail and sales, 30% of malls are closing in the next 4 years. So the danger here is to think of it as artificial intelligence is coming. It's actually already eating up the most common jobs in our economy, and it's driving Americans into distress in various ways in the numbers.
Are there other alternatives that you've considered other than just universal basic income, like educating people about this being a real issue and perhaps pushing them or directing them towards other occupations?
The truth of it, Joe, is that there are 3.5 million truck drivers in this country right now. It's the most common job in 29 states. And the average trucker is a 49-year-old guy with a high school education, maybe ex-military. So then if you say, hey, I'm going to retrain 500,000 truck drivers, for what exactly is like issue number one?
Right.
And that these guys didn't love school 30 years ago. It's not like driving a truck has made them really excited about the idea.
Yeah.
And then the new job you're training them for, I looked into the data as to how good we were at retraining, let's say, displaced manufacturing workers in the Midwest when we started decimating their jobs. And we're terrible at it. Like, according to independent studies, government-funded retraining programs had a success rate of between 0 and 15% in real life. Like, this is what actually happened to the workers of Michigan and Indiana and Ohio.
I mean, I'm trying to look at this through rose-colored glasses, I guess. I'm trying to think if there's a way that these people can adapt.
People legitimately talk about retraining coal miners to be software engineers. Stuff that on the face of it makes no sense. But the reason why we're stretching for that is because we're looking for some kind of retraining-oriented solution when the numbers show that that's just not going to be the recipe, therefore actual success.
It's kind of preposterous to ask someone who doesn't have an education to do something that's as difficult as code, computer language.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we're going to get to a point where AI can do some basic coding at a certain level.
When you're talking about universal basic income, there's 2 questions that come up. How much money and where is it coming from?
So first, I want to say that if you look at the heritage of universal basic income, it's a deeply American idea where Thomas Paine was for it at the founding of the country. And then Martin Luther King was for it. Milton Friedman, the godfather of conservative economists, was for it. And one state has had it in effect for 37 years, where everyone in that state gets between $1,000 and $2,000 a year, no questions asked.
That's Alaska?
Yeah, it's Alaska, and they fund it with oil money. And what I'm going around telling people is that technology is the oil of the 21st century. We're spending about $1.5 trillion right now on 126 welfare programs and Social Security. So the $3 trillion actually shrinks a lot very fast because of the fact that about half of Americans are already getting various income support from the government. So the real price tag is closer to about 1.8 trillion if you say everyone who's 18 and up. Now, for context, the entire U.S. economy is now 20 trillion, up 5 trillion in the last 12 years, and the federal budget's 4 trillion. So you're looking at 1.8 trillion. It's a lot of money. We all know that right now most Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. 57% of Americans can't afford an unexpected $500 bill. So you put $1,000 a month into their hands, it's going to go right back into the economy. They're going to spend it on food, childcare, car repairs they've been putting off, the occasional night out. And then all of those businesses end up hiring more people, and then we end up getting some of the money back as tax revenues. We're going to get back, let's call it $400 billion in new tax receipts because everyone's going to be spending more money. We're going to save $100 to $200 billion on things like incarceration and homelessness services and emergency room health care.
Andrew, thanks very much for coming on. And I meant that with sincerity. I haven't heard anybody in our political conversation describe the threat as clearly and compellingly as you have. Why should we be worried about automation?
Well, if you look at the backdrop, we automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs in Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Missouri, and those communities have never recovered. Where if you look at the numbers, half of the workers left the workforce and never worked again, and then half of that group filed for disability. Now, what happened to the manufacturing workers is now going to happen to the truck drivers, retail workers, call centers, fast food workers, and on through the economy as we evolve and technology marginalizes the labor of more and more Americans.
What will be the effects of that to you? I mean, that's a massive displacement of people. What will happen once that happens?
Well, as you said, I think it's going to be disastrous. Where if you look at truck drivers alone, being a trucker is the most common job in 29 states. There are 3.5 million truck drivers in this country. And my friends in Silicon Valley are working on trucks that can drive themselves because that's where the money is, where we can save tens, even hundreds of billions of dollars by trying to automate that job. But I was just with truck drivers in Iowa last week, and imagining that community recovering from their income going from, let's call it $50,000 a year to much, much less than that catastrophically, it's going to be a disaster for many, many American communities.
You're one of the only people I've ever met who's honest about the effects of deindustrialization. I remember in Washington, the idea was they'll all become computer programmers, and so everything is fine, but that didn't happen. My question is, do we have to sit passively back and let this happen to the country?
Well, that's why I'm running for president, Tucker, is I think it would be insane to just sit back and watch this automation wave overtake our communities and our economy. So we're not ostriches. We can get our heads up out of the sand and say, look, we get it. Artificial intelligence is real. Self-driving cars and trucks are being tested on the highways right now, and we need to evolve. We need to actually start pushing the way we think of economic progress to include how our families are doing, how our children are doing, and things that would actually matter to the American people. Because GDP is going to lead us off a cliff. You know, robot trucks, great for GDP, terrible for many, many American communities. So we need to get with the program and figure out how to actually make this economy work for people.
I sit with my jaw open. I agree with you so strongly. Let me ask you finally, why isn't this a central question in the campaign of everybody running for president on any side? And why instead are they talking about issues that really are kind of frivolous? Why aren't they talking about this?
You know, it's a good question, Tucker. I mean, one of the reasons I'm running for president is to push this into the center of the mainstream agenda where every candidate should be talking about what we're going to do about the fact that we're automating away the most common jobs in the economy right now. As we're sitting here together, the labor force participation rate in the United States is 63.2%, the same level as Ecuador and Costa Rica. And if anyone thinks that's where America ought to be, I mean, that number is even going to be further challenged when all this technology comes online. So we have to make America embrace this challenge of the 21st century and then try and address it together as a people.